For this bonus episode of Red Pens and Red Flags, I sit down with an alternative school educator, Tazz Groffe, to talk about what real accountability and what care looks like for students who've been failed by the system. We dig into state versus Trump's authoritarian control of curriculum, vouchers and funding, and DEI being done right. Oh, and why choice without oversight hurts the most vulnerable. And Tazz shares frontline worries, from surveillance creeping into classrooms to National Guard being deployed in our United States cities. And the one thing that still gives him hope, students are learning to think critically. Now, if you care about the future of public education and the religious imperialism happening in Texas and in Oklahoma, this conversation is a must listen. Welcome to Red Pens and Red Flags, the podcast that's not afraid to grade the current state of American education. My name is Rictor, a graduate knee-deep in the world of teaching, technology, and just trying to understand what is happening to our country. Today, I'm joined by Tazz Groffe. Thank you for participating in this podcast discussion regarding the current climate in education.
Well, thank you for having me.
Tazz, can you describe to me and our audience what your current role is in education?
My current role in education is to provide an alternative pathway for students who are not finding success in the regular standard high school environment.
Explain that further.
So let's say you have a kiddo who, says they get in a fight and they're being bullied and they don't want to come back to the regular school because they're afraid that the bullying is going to continue, because to be honest with you, our school system doesn't do a good job policing bullies. So they say, I don't want to go back to this school. So they come to my school instead. We have about 50 kids and we address things like that. Because here's the thing, it's not just that, it's a whole multitude of things. It's not necessarily a catch-all, but it's a program, right? To get kids back on track or to provide them an alternative pathway because the system has failed them.
So it's not like a typical classroom situation.
No, and it's kind of tough to really wrap your head around what it is because it's a lot of things. It's not just one thing. And the thing that's frustrating is sometimes we get called something like a diploma mill, and that's just not the case. What we are is a team of educators that look at each student that we have under our care and say, what do they need to be successful? And we do an intensive dive with them into what that looks like, set them up on a plan, give them resources, and get them across the finish line. And we're very good at what we do.
Have your personal values as an educator influenced the way you approach your work?
100%. As an alternative school educator, I'm able to bring my values to the classroom without being under the microscope. Being an alternative school educator allows me the freedom to explore different pathways to the same outcome. For example, I try to design each lesson where there's different choices to accomplishing the same amount of work or the same amount of knowledge. And you can do that to some degree in a regular school, but you don't get the opportunity to work with each kid individually one-on-one. Like if I have a student who I need to get some work done, I can find him in the building, no problem. Go down and get him and drag him back up and have him do the work. It's hard to do that in a big school, right? Accountability is there, and it's another level of care. Right, so my personal value is there's a few things that I kind of bring to it: accountability and care. So the first thing is accountability. I can hold kids accountable a lot easier in my building because I can find them and I can sit with them and they know that that's what they're there for. And the other thing is a level of care. A lot of these kids come at us and they're gang affected. They're immigrants. They're coming from a house that's been moving around because they've been trying to escape an abusive partner of their parents. And it's just they come at us like a stick out of the mud. And what a lot of people struggle with, and one of the things that the system struggles with, is putting those kids into a public school setting. They're going to get that mud all over the place because they haven't been cleaned off yet. They haven't had the level of care to really get them to be in the pile of regular sticks that is high school. So when they come to us, we deal with these kids who've got a little mud on them.
How do you respond when students or parents bring up politically charged topics?
Perspective. I ask for their perspective. One of my favorite phrases is "tell me more," because it puts it on them to explain their position. If they're a lot of times a parent or a student, more often than not, because I rarely get parents coming after me, but a student might challenge me, and I'll just ask them, to clarify what they're saying. And a lot of times they'll find the fault in their own position, so to speak. But the big thing is approaching it with curiosity. Because if they're coming at me to gaslight me, then that's their goal. But if I whip it around and say, tell me more, then they're just throwing the oil on themselves. And it's fun to watch. And it's educational.
It's educational.
It can be, yeah, because they're learning. It's critical thinking, which the right is very scared of. Go ahead.
By giving back power to the states and how they handle public education, what positives and negatives do you foresee?
Let's start with the positives, and maybe we'll circle back around to those. But the positives I see is that it allows more agency for the states to, meet the needs of their community. What we learn up here in the Pacific Northwest might be a little bit different than what they learn, on the East Coast or down in the South or the Midwest. The negatives, though, let's be real. What the federal government, their role is to make sure that we are teaching our kids the proper history. And we are teaching our kids the reality of what America is. And the thing that sucks is that we're at a divide right now where America was this tidal wave of, expansion and a way of life. And that happened. And what history is now is looking back at that and going, wow, we caused a lot of harm, which is true. But then also recognizing that there's another group out there that's saying, we're still in that phase. We're still in that expansion thing. That's what America's all about, right? Come get your own. Oh, the negatives are easy. The problem is that the federal government was designed to make sure that states are teaching the proper history. And when you have this idea that states want to push their narrative of history in a way that aligns with the history that they want, but doesn't necessarily align with reality, there's a problem. So, for example, we have this very important idea of separation of church and state, but in a state like Oklahoma, all of a sudden you have to have the 10 Commandments on your wall.
Frisco ISD gave us these photos of the 10 Commandments now hanging in each of its 4,000 plus classrooms. The district spent $1,800 purchasing these posters. It didn't have to.
It's pretty simple, but it has all the statutorily required words on it.
Texas Values, a faith-based conservative group, and other organizations are coordinating a statewide donation drive. They estimate about 90,000 posters are either already displayed or will be soon, even though the law requiring them does not take effect until September 1st, and even though it's ignited anger.
This is a power play. By using our power as legislators to elevate our faith tradition over all the rest, that's the kind of stuff that gives us Christians a bad name.
And action. The ACLU sued and hopes to block the law at a hearing this week.
I think we're in a very solid place legally.
It's a question of whether this teaches American history or promotes the Christian faith.
We just want to make sure that kids have everything they need as they grow. They cry out a lot of times for moral clarity because we're in very uncertain times. And I think the 10 Commandments is an important piece of our history.
No matter their faith.
Absolutely.
In Dallas, I'm Teresa Woodard.
But then we have a president that has violated every single one of those 10 commandments. So in my classroom, right, I'm going to have both perspectives, I suppose, if I were put in a place like that. But that's just me. But in Oklahoma, you're forced to have that. So what happens when you have a Jewish kid or a Muslim kid or a kid that doesn't have a religion at all come in and go, well, that's some good teachings, but it's not something that I feel comfortable having to, learn about and abide by.
And the positives?
The positives, well, here's one thing that it does. It allows, I guess, for those states that the positives of this is that it allows states to decide if they disagree. For example, a lot of textbooks are made for Texas because they're the biggest buyer of textbooks. And so whatever Texas says goes in the textbooks and then they get sold to other states. Right? Now, maybe I don't want to teach the curriculum that Texas is teaching. In Oregon, I don't have to. I can choose something else.
Texas teachers, I finally got my 10 commandments. Someone donated some to all of our classrooms in all of our school. So every classroom has to have these up, and it has to be by my door. Check this out. So here's my door. I have all kinds of stuff right there. I have this. I don't think it can fit up there. But then I have this area right here. So everyone is different. Everyone belongs. So here it is. It's up in my room. Now, the thing that they told us, since they had it up here, now if the kids ask questions, our answer is, that is a great conversation for your parents. That's it. That's what we say. It's a great question for your parents. We defer to them. And that's it. It's up in my classroom. What else can I do? But everyone is different and everyone belongs.
How do you think state level control has historically impacted marginalized communities in education?
Well, it looks every state is going to educate and put funding towards their needs. So if they're let's say they're an agricultural focused state, they're probably going to put more education funding towards, upper classes and stuff like that, and trying to keep our immigrant communities. They're probably not going to put a lot towards our immigrant communities and our communities of color, because they're going to want those workers to stay in poverty. And so and that's the thing, they're probably going to teach that role within the class. I remember my mother telling me back when she was in high school that when they got classes, they made the classes for them, and all the Hispanic girls were in sewing classes, and all the girls of color were in similar type classes. They kind of organize you based on what your role in society was going to be based on your class. And I feel like that's what we're risking going back to, where states are going to say, we'll push these programs for these immigrant kids to get them to learn, agricultural things or things for service, things that limits their opportunities. Gives them a function, absolutely. Gives them opportunities, sure, but it limits those opportunities. It doesn't give them all opportunities that everybody has access to.
Are you familiar with Project 2025? If so, what are your initial reactions or concerns?
Yeah, I'm aware of Project 2025, and it's happening, but also you have to understand that a lot of that is policy, and a lot of the stuff they're pushing as policy in Project 2025 would require the change of law. So while there is policy change, again, going back to states' rights, they can choose if that policy aligns with their policy or how we interpret that policy. At least that's how I view it in my classroom.
Do you have any concerns or thoughts regarding the attempted shuttering of the Department of Education?
So the Department of Education was really designed to protect the most vulnerable populations, the poorest of kids, those in poverty. So free lunches, services, that kind of stuff. So when you shutter the Department of Education, you're taking away all of that. So where is that going? Well, who knows? Tax cuts for the wealthy, who knows? But what we do also know is that there's a push for school vouchers, and that is another distribution of wealth where they're taking away money from the poor kids, because if you have a student who's going to a private school and it costs $20,000, or maybe it costs $30,000 a year, and they get a voucher for $20,000, that money that should go towards the public education system, they can choose to take and give to the private institutions. So then they're getting a $20,000 break, and that's from a family that can already afford to pay for a private education. That's great for a middle-class family, but that money isn't coming from the top earners. It's coming from the poorest of children. So they're taking that money away from the public education. And by the way, they're telling these schools that they can decide who they're going to admit. And so they can choose not to admit kids that come from a certain area that they deem maybe it's too dangerous, or maybe it's, doesn't align with their values. So it forces particularly vulnerable populations into an underfunded public school system, and that's the damage you're doing by taking away the Department of Education and going to a voucher system for the states.
Currently, Oregon receives 10% of its funding for education from the Department of Education. What would it mean for your students if that funding was taken away?
Well, for my students, a lot of them rely on services that are provided not just from the Department of Education, but other services as well. And so it would really be a cascading effect from all the different places losing funding. It wouldn't just be the Department of Education, because they're not just going to cut the Department of Education. They'll cut the Department of Education. They'll cut self-sufficiency. They'll cut social services. It's all going to go, because remember, the goal here is to allow people to prove their worth, essentially, right? Go out, get a job. It's Puritanism. You got to be able to be part of society in order to be taken care of. You can't just exist.
Will students receive the same quality of education if states hold more power?
Depends on how the states fund their schools. Because look at the state of Florida. They went to a voucher system, and a majority of that went to institutions that are private, right? That are already taking funding from people, already taking money. So again, what I just said is happening already in some states, is that those public school funds are going towards the private school systems. And by the way, these are private school systems that don't get a lot of scrutiny, and they can teach however they want. And I'm going to be honest, I went through the Catholic school teaching system, and there are some things that are very questionable about how they teach our children.
What are your thoughts on DEI in the professional landscape and classrooms?
So you really have to understand what DEI is, and this is the problem that a lot of people don't understand. DEI isn't about allowing people, underprivileged community people, to get jobs. It's about making sure that they're represented. So if you go into a hospital with 5 doctors and you live in a community that is 20% black, and you walk into that hospital, you should have 1 black doctor, because they're going to understand your anatomy, your physiology, how you're feeling a lot more than those white doctors. Those white doctors might be really good, but they're going to be really good at understanding a lot of white people, particularly white men, if they're all men, right? And so again, DEI is not about making it fair on the playing field of a job necessarily. It's about making it accessible to the entire community, right? So why is it important for a school to have DEI? Well, it's important because we serve a lot of different communities. And so if a Spanish-speaking student comes in, or a parent comes in, and there's no Spanish-speaking staff, how are we serving them properly? We need to have somebody on staff that speaks Spanish. It makes sense. So DEI is important to allow us to serve our entire community, but it's been kind of bastardized to be this, they're just making it so that communities of color get preferential treatment and they get hired before a better qualified white candidate. Well, that's not the case. The job is not designed for that particular demographic. DEI is very important. It needs to be understood, and the best way to do that is to educate people.
Do you consider yourself DEI?
No, I am a white man.
Do you consider yourself privileged?
Yes.
What comes with that?
What comes with that is really what it comes with is almost an undeserved trust. I can walk down the street and nobody's going to give me any sort of problem, because there's a bit of trust that I'm going to behave in this community, right? Whereas we have these ideas that other people who aren't a white man or white or anything like that might be out to get you, might be there to cause you harm, might be up to something. And that's a problem. I don't get looked at that way.
What do you think schools will look like 5 to 10 years from now if current trends continue?
You remember when I talked about back in the day, there was segregation within the school based on kind of your role in the community. I think we're going to get back to that.
Hispanic girls are sewing and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, things of that nature, where certain classes, certain things are going to be reserved for certain students, or more accessible, I should say.
What does it mean for you as a teacher during these politically volatile times?
What does it mean to be a teacher in these politically volatile times? Well, the most important thing is that I speak my truth within my classroom. Now, that truth might not align, and it's aligned with the current administration, and it's important that my students know that. So whenever I talk to them, I always say, that this is my opinion and it might not align with others. And I always follow it up with, look at the facts, make your own opinion, because they don't need to argue with me whether or not my opinion or position is correct. What they need to do is figure out what their position is so they can argue with me why their position is important, if that makes sense.
What kind of support do teachers and students need most right now?
This is one thing that I've said that we need. We need social services in our schools. We need people to help these students process the crazy world that we live in right now. When I was in elementary school teaching, our school counselor was way overwhelmed. She would go home crying every day because she had 200 kids on her caseload at my school, but she also had 3 other schools that she went to. She was only at my school twice a week. But it was nuts. And I said, we need a counselor for every grade level. That would be ideal, because that would give each counselor a caseload of, say, I'm trying to think here, maybe 90 kids, 90 to 100 kids. And that would be reasonable. But you have one for about 1,000 kids. And it's just, how do you provide the kid? Because here's the other thing. Kids aren't going to learn unless they're ready to learn. And when you have 1,000 kids on your caseload, how can you get those kids ready to learn?
This next question was not asked to my previous guests because history is happening as we speak. And recently, the current president has put National Guard troops in American cities, 2 so far as of this recording, Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. Now that more National Guard troops are going to be sent to other cities, 19 states as of this moment, is it far-fetched for you to be concerned about having a National Guard member standing in your classroom watching what you teach?
Can you imagine the fun I'd have with them? I'm not concerned. Here's what I'm more concerned about. I'm not necessarily concerned about a National Guard troop in my room. I'm more concerned about like a camera, a robot, something that's going to be recording and analyzing what I'm teaching, because we're at that point. I kind of joked a little bit about it a few years ago, saying that, they're going to have a humanoid robot in the classroom pretty soon, and it's not going to be in place of a teacher yet. It's going to be in place of an instructional assistant. I've got instructional assistants in a lot of my classes, and that's going to be the first thing that they're going to take over. Because you can have an AI robot act as an instructional assistant, but that thing's also going to be able to record and analyze what you're doing, and maybe even run you through some kind of test to make sure that you're teaching appropriate material.
You'll be constantly evaluated.
Yeah.
This is the last question. What gives you hope in this moment in our country as a teacher?
That's a tough one. Because there's right now, the problem about the hope is that we're still spiraling down. That's a tough one, because right now it feels like we are at the beginning of this journey. And it feels very much like a sickness, like it's coming along. We're still able to move and we're still kind of healthy, but we know that it's going to get worse and we're going to get sick and we're going to suffer. So as far as hope goes, the only hope I have right now is that my students listen to me and that they are starting to process what is happening and that they are thinking critically, and they are doing a good job of doing that. I have hope in terms of our future and our children.
Well, thank you, Tazz, for taking some time out of your day to answer some questions regarding education.
You're welcome.
If you could send a message to the Trump administration right now, who's making decisions about the future of education, what would you want them to hear?
Go fuck yourself.
Do you want that to be your answer? I mean, I'll leave it.
I mean, the problem is you can't send them a message, because I know what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're tearing down education so that they can do exactly what I've been saying, is they want to be able to control how we educate our kids. And they don't want a safety net. They want to be able to tailor it to their specific reality. So, yeah, go fuck yourself.
Great ending. I like that. No teacher said that.
Thank you for listening to Red Pens and Red Flags. This podcast series samples multiple public education professionals from different roles in schools. This includes teachers, administrators, special education, paraprofessionals, and language specialists.